It doesn't matter if you're pitching a new initiative or a new project or a new program of work. You either get glazy eyes, rolly eyes, or sparkly eyes.
So which eyes am I doing right now, Tim?
There's a big kind of elephant in the room question these days that everyone is talking about. Actually, your workforce is becoming more and more agentic.
Yeah, I think you can just consider your workforce as being a mixture. It's a hybrid mix now. It's human and non-human workforce. Yes, of course, it's about value. Yes, of course, it's about efficiency and productivity and all of those things. They're very measurable. But behind it, there's a human layer, and the human layer is about empowerment.
The audience's question will be core is, where the hell do I work in the future?
If you're working only in a very transactional ones and zeros type space, give it to a machine to do.
So Tim, welcome to the AI Values podcast. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks, Edosa. What a cool podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
We certainly hope so, Tim. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks, Lindley. Great to be here.
Right, let's get straight into it. Look, Tim, you've been in some of the most demanding environments thinkable from a data perspective, but even beyond that. I mean, you've been, in British Army. You've been not just in the data elements of British Army, in the actual army. You've also been out there in the Middle East. You've got out and built an airline from the ground up, from nothing. But before we get into all the intricacies of, boardrooms and execs and whatever else, can we just start, Tim, with what does it take to actually lead within AI in today's world?
Well, Edosa, once you've finished writing my CV, thanks very much. Look, leadership is an important thing to me. You've mentioned I used to be in the army, and I grew up as a young adult and beyond in the army. And when you go through the gates at Sandhurst on your first day as an officer cadet, a squeaky 18-year-old in my case, right from the beginning, that motto, serve to lead, becomes a compelling part of what matters to you. So this concept of servant leadership, where it's not about you, it's about the needs of your team or the demands of the task, and the needs of the individuals within your team, they all matter more than your own needs. So there's an element there in leadership, which is about selflessness. Not an easy word to say at this stage of the day. But it's coupled with other aspects of personality and things that we would think about being right. So things like integrity, doing the right thing for the right reason, things like ethics, and especially around AI. Now, there's this definite conversation about just because you can doesn't mean you should. That's a great working definition of where ethics comes into play.
Absolutely.
And I think that the other couple of aspects around effective leadership are about good communication skills, because you can have all the great ideas of what you want to do and how you want to solve the problem. And follow me, guys, I've got this sorted. But if you can't communicate that, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Tim, because I've been lucky enough to speak to a lot of military leaders over the years, and including in the US Special Forces formerly, and similar stories, which is if you don't motivate people and you don't communicate, they won't follow you into battle. Now, actually, wouldn't it be lovely in business if that was a principle carried through? That so often isn't the case in management. Do you think that there needs to be a change, particularly now with AI, and that people need to really focus on their basic communication skills, their basic understanding of what's going on, because things will move quickly with or without you?
Yeah, I think so. And I think part of that skill is understanding who's the audience you're speaking to. We're having a conversation now that's designed for board members, it's designed for fellow leaders, it's designed for fellow specialists in the data and AI space. But it could also be designed for someone who's just finishing their university studies and wants to say, well, what does this look like from the other end of the spectrum? And so there's a skill here. Once you've understood your audience, then you understand, how do you want to land your master messages? What's the most effective way of doing that? And of course, for me, oral communication seems to work well. Distilling the message down into its really core fundamental elements and making sure those have landed is the place to start, especially with data and AI, because it can be a bit opaque for some people, for non-specialists, and you would expect it to be, as some areas of marketing are opaque to me, but we've got to be, as data and AI leaders, able to market our skill set.
So what's the? Edosa, please, come in.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. Actually, I love the fact that you laid it all out in terms of the different kinds of audiences, the different kinds of interaction, stakeholders, and managing that conversation. But I want to take it up a level just now and actually look at it from a boardroom, an exec, a very senior sort of stakeholders. And I know, Tim, from the past, you have sort of highlighted these three types of kind of reactions that you get: the kind of glazy, the googly eyes, or even the sparkly eyes. How can you take us into that and give us a sense of, bring us into that room as to how that manifests in reality?
Right. So it doesn't matter if you're pitching a new initiative or a new project or a new program of work, or whether you're helping a board understand, or the executive committee, senior leaders understand something that's not in their personal skill set. There's that typical three-set reaction, isn't there? You either get glazy eyes, rolly eyes, or sparkly eyes. And the glazy eyes are, I have no idea what you're talking about. I really hope you shut up soon, Tim. The rolly eyes are, oh, here he goes again, banging on around data and AI. I know my job. Leave me alone to get on with it. Stay out of the way. The real leaders that I want to engage with, where you're pushing at an open door, are the ones with the sparkly eyes who lean forward and they say, that means I'll be able to solve this challenge. And that means we'll be able to be more proactive with that. And if you bring that particular technique to bear, Tim, and that data or those AI agents into play, that'll make us much faster to market. Great. I love that. Come on, let's talk the detail. Now I want to deal with the sparkly-eyed leader. And after a while, Rolly and Glazy will have to pay attention or they're going to get left behind.
So which eyes am I doing right now, Tim?
Well, I'm leaning in.
I'm getting sparky from Edosa and Rolly from Lindley.
Excellent. Yeah, listen. One thing that's come up on the podcast a few times in principle, but also I think it's something you're really passionate about is the role. I mean, in order to take people from rolly and glazy to sparkly, is that translation thing that we need to tell good stories, that we need to be some kind of interpreter of what we're up to. Is that for you, and I'm leading you here, but is that for you the most or one of the most important functions that we need to have within any business, any organization, a charity, even certainly government, to make this all work? It's
back to effective communication. Right. In another life, I qualified as an interpreter English-French. The skill sets you use when you're in a room with two practitioners, to keep it the simplest, two people who want to talk to each other but don't understand each other's language, and you're the person in the middle being the conduit for that language. Now, clearly, that skill set's been overtaken by Google Translate, damn it. But on a very human level, the art of consecutive or sequential interpretation is basically, when I bring that to data terms, what I'm saying is I'm having a conversation with the business leader over here who's describing the business challenge and what they're trying to achieve and what a successful outcome would look like. And I'm able to turn that into technical terms to one of my specialists on my team, a data scientist or an AI engineer or an ML ops guy, and explain to them in their language or enough of their language so that they can get, oh, great, this is the technique or techniques or the approach that we would take. This is how we'd design that approach or that flow. If you just left them to talk to each other, and that's not in any way denigrating the business leader or the data and AI specialist, but if you left them just to talk to each other without that facilitation in the middle, without interpreting, you're going to end up with something that could risk being a dialogue of the deaf. And why waste that time? The idea is to really get to the point of what's the problem? Yes, I can solve for that. And oh, by the way, we can also solve for that. Great, that solves the rest of my problem I didn't even know I had. Perfect. Put yourself in the middle as an interpreter, because that's what leaders do. They facilitate and they help engagement and they help iron out those creases and join those dots. I've mixed too many metaphors there. That's what the art of the interpreter is.
So Tim, that was great. You know, I love the fact you're talking about the problem and how we go from problem over here to solution over there, and the people you work with, the teams you work with to make that happen. I just wonder, there's a big kind of elephant in the room question these days that everyone is talking about, and that question is, with the workforce moving from human to machines through AI of all kinds, specifically now, of course, agentic, and who knows what comes next after that. How are we actually dealing with that? How are you seeing that transition where actually your workforce is becoming more and more, I suppose, digital and agentic?
Yeah, I think you can just consider your workforce as being a mixture. It's a hybrid mix now. It's human and non-human workforce, so human and machine. And the logic there is that you want each of those moving parts to be playing to their strengths. I'm an executive coach, and I believe in the strengths-based approach to coaching, where you're helping people discover what they're good at. Well, of course, with AI agent, you tell it what it's good at, and hey, presto, it becomes good at it. With a human, you leave them to deal with stuff that only humans can do. What does that mean? Leaders like me have to be able to define what are those elements of a process, what are those elements of a solution set that only a human can do, or a human can do much more effectively than a machine, and where can a machine or an AI or an agent play to its strengths? And typically, high volume, highly repetitive, highly structured type information or data is where an AI can play amazingly to its strengths. Now that builds a challenge, of course.
Doesn't it give you
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, doesn't it give you a bit of a shiver as an executive coach? And it gave me a little bit of a shiver when Edosa said that, which is a fact of our lives, is that yes, the workforce is changing, and that will include a lot more agentic pieces replacing some of the human functions. And so doesn't that give you a bit of a shiver? And is there a way that we as the humans watching and listening to this can navigate that? Because it's a core question. Edosa's question is core. Also, the audience's question will be core, is where the hell do I work in the future?
Yeah, work in a space where humans thrive. Work in a space where reasoning and understanding and interpretation and nuance are really important. If you're working only in a very transactional ones and zeros type space, give it to a machine to do. Now, how does that boil down? Of course, it's interesting because for the newcomers into our industry, into any industry, we have so often trained our interns or our apprentices or our entry-level graduates in the repetitive, predictable, easy tasks, just volume and repetition. And that's how they've learned their core skill sets, or learned to apply what they've learned in education or training to their core skill sets. Well, you're going to lose that opportunity now, because you're going to almost certainly seek to do that using AI. So the nuanced change now is, again, we as leaders have to find a way where we elevate the value that entry-level jobs bring, which is the questioning element, the nuance, the understanding. Does this make sense? Why am I getting this answer? That's counterintuitive. I wasn't expecting that. Actually, what I love about this is my kids' generations, they're really good at posing those fundamental questions. So it's already one of their strengths. Let them play to it, rather than boring them with the drudgery of repetitive work. But people are going to have to learn that entry-level stuff a different way, rather than just the turning the mill on routine tasks repetitively done.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to agree. I think there is certainly a lot to be said around how we reshape. And of course, there'll be a gap clearly between the way we do things today and the way we do things tomorrow. But I want to move us ever so slightly now to the why we're doing what we're doing. Why do we have data and AI and agentic or whatever else? Why do we have it? And I think ultimately it's about creating value. And, that is interesting that over time, rather than getting better at creating value, we seem to be getting worse. And the reason I say that is that all of the stats are I suppose, getting worse and worse. We've started with something like, I don't know, 75%. I think in years gone by, I think it was Gartner has come out 75% of things fail. And then we've gone to 85 with likes of McKinsey, and now we're on 95 with likes of the MIT. So the first question is for you, Tim, do you believe all of these stats? And if not, why not?
Right, I've got to be really careful about this because Gartner, McKinsey, and MIT, they've got some clever researchers, and so let's trust the data that they've harnessed to come up with these interpretations. What I will say, it's not a question of whether I believe it or not. It's really what's my personal lived experience, and my personal lived experience is no, it's not as high as 95%. Now, it's not 95% success. Don't get me wrong, but this boils down to what is the problem you're trying to solve and how do you go about it? And if you're using AI, or particularly agentic AI, playing to its strengths, and you think of AI as you're an intern, you're really good at stuff, but I'm not going to throw my brain away. I'm not going to stop supervising, but be good at that repetitive stuff, you can make it work. I guess part of what MIT et al. Will have discovered is when people get hyper ambitious very quickly and think that AI, magical thinking, think that AI is the Harry Potter school of solving problems, and it's not. AI is just another way of solving typically a process approach to problems. Break it down into bite-sized chunks and address those bite-sized chunks. And Agentic is very well suited to that. And again, I think we've got enough evidence of successful deployments of Agentic now to know that it can work, providing you do what it's designed for and not wish it to be designed for something else. That's quite a general approach, because I haven't seen the detail of the latest MIT study, but I don't think I have to buy into. There's bias in my thinking. Be wary of bias, but I don't think I have to buy into such doom-laden stats because it sells the wrong message of our direction of travel, I think.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our core chat. We will, of course, extend our chat behind the scenes, and we'll release that later on for our wonderful audience. But look, all this in mind, and we've talked about the interpreting layer, the translation, so that young people can maybe come in and start working much more cleverly, much more smarter and more creatively with AI bots of the future and AI tools of the future. But coming back to the sort of the purpose of this, and by the way, I've just come up with a new Harry Potter phrase to describe what you've been talking about. It's expelliarmus.
Oh, very good.
It doesn't really work. It needs some tweaking and development, I feel. But it's there. Let's work on that. But no, I think, coming back to the stuff you talked about at the very start, which is the qualities of leadership, and these are values. These are important values that any organization needs in order to make this stuff work. Whether it's 95% or 75% failure rate, whatever the rate is, it's high, but that's what happens when you really shake the tree and see what comes out. So I wonder what values, and maybe if there is a value you think is that we need to be focusing on. But let's talk about the values for a moment. What should we be focusing on, the why we're doing this, in order to just create a much healthier process, a much healthier success rate, and also to make sure that we're working well with AI?
I think it's about empowerment. This is about... yes, of course, it's about value. Yes, of course, it's about efficiency and productivity and all of those things. They're very measurable. But behind it, there's a human layer, and the human layer is about empowerment. Non-specialists in this space want to have their work rendered easier, more effective, more simple, so they can get on with the more demanding stuff. And they're empowered. Let AI do the basics, liberate them to do the more advanced stuff, and enabled by AI as the AI learns more. So for me, the value of doing this is reflected in how content is your workforce, how engaged are your workforce, how much adoption do you get. Now, adoption you can measure, but the depth behind the adoption, that's really quite intangible. But you'll see it in people's eyes. Your workforce will have sparkly eyes when someone says, I've got an AI tool for this.
Absolutely. Listen,
I was just going to say, absolutely. Amazing. I agree with that. But I think I want to take it to slightly, just before we close, one question, which I think, links very nicely to that, is really around leadership, which you've touched on quite a lot of over this. But I just wonder, in your experience, you've been, in so many different leadership positions, you've observed very good leaders as well. If there was a single quality, Tim, that you think actually cuts across good leaders and what good leadership looks like, what would that one quality be?
I think this might sound a bit glib, but I think it works. You're a leader to inspire. You've got to have this pioneering spirit. In the context of what we're talking about, it's new, and the next new comes quickly, and the next one after that. If you don't have this sense of adventure, this sense of inspiration, that this can help us make a difference, and let's figure out how, then you'll end up being left behind by progress that runs away from you, or you'll just fail to bring your team with you. So for me, it's about this sort of pioneering and inspirational approach that gives a reason for people to believe, yeah, this is going to work. This is going to be great. It doesn't mean you throw away all reality, of course. But if you're not inspired and motivated by this kind of subject matter as a leader in this space, no one around you is going to be. And that's the secret to taking people with you.
And in terms of the storytelling bit of that, should we all be shrinking violets and let the work speak for itself? Or do we have to shout about the good stuff that we're doing?
There's two versions of this, right? Younger Tim would have said, no, let the work speak for itself. I'm not going to be shouting this from the rooftops. All the rest is marketing. Tim today says, no, actually, I probably need to grow my shameless gene a bit more and be much more proactive in the way that I'm selling and explaining and showcasing and demonstrating much more actively to all the flavors in an organization of people, because they'll all see different places where they can adopt. Basically, show, don't tell, explain as you go, demonstrate the utility and the usefulness in a much more shameless way, and just cast aside that personal or false modesty. Because if you don't, others will fill that space with their noise about what they're doing, and the investment changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're coming to the close now, and there's so much, Tim, there's so much more we need to talk about. I know we will go into the extended, but I think there's about as much time as we've got for this segment. So all that's left to do is really thank you so very much. Thank you also for those listening and watching. It's been fascinating how time has flown and the amount of insights and knowledge we've extracted from Tim. So thank you ever so much, Tim.
My pleasure, Edosa. Nice to speak to you guys.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks very much indeed. Lovely to have you with us. Thank you.